and I think the folks wanted to go back to Colorado because Uncle Ed was there, Mother's oldest brother, and his daughter was there, Vita Harmon. She's the one that sent the money, the money she had saved up to buy her false teeth. She'd sent to Mother, and for gas. That's when we got back to Colorado. We lived with Uncle Ed for just a short time, maybe a matter of months, but not too long. And then the folks found a little house on the road that we lived on, is where Daddy bought a farm. And Grandma Jorgensen moved in with us then. She was sick. At the time I didn't know it, but the cancer was coming back. She'd had cancer, and breast cancer. Actually, Grandma's the one that gave Dickie's name, you might say. His name was Marlon Arthur. And Grandma called him her little Dickens, and it got shortened to Dick. I guess he borrowed $2,000. I don't remember what kind of a loan they called them, but there was a special kind of loan. And he borrowed a couple of $1,000, and he bought 15 acres with $1,000. He bought lumber with the other $1,000, and he built a house with the $1,000, bought the 15 acres with the other $1,000, and then lost the farm because he couldn't pay for it. But I left home before that. We raised marglobes and potato leaves, mostly marglobe tomatoes, and real good cantaloupes. Probably could remember what they were called, but right now I can't. We also raised corn to feed our pigs and chickens and turkeys. Raised alfalfa to feed the horses and the cows, and we raised turkeys and chickens and pigs, cows. We had a mule, old Buck. He was smarter than we were. When we'd ride him, the only way we could get him to move was with a switch. And if you accidentally touched his ears with the switch, he'd buck you off. And I guess that's why we called him Buck. It's a big red mule. And Daddy could work him without lines. By just talking to him. And he just learned to turn at the end of a row. And if he'd start turning the wrong way, well, Daddy'd holler at him and he'd turn the other way. Just used him for cultivating, and we had 2 white horses. I think they were both mares. Babe and Lady, something like that, their names. They were kind of grayish-white. And they pulled the plows and the rakes and the mowing machines and spring tooth and harrows and floats, the slips to pick up the hay. I was awful little to hold the cultivator down, but I remember running the cultivator through the corn. We irrigated by hand. We had head ditches, and then they would break down into sets, with the crease, and then they would, there was another ditch that would that go across the place, and the head ditch was just let into these, if it was a good head of water, then he could irrigate more creases. He set it, and then sometimes we could check it and see how far let more water into one crease that was not getting wet enough. The water hadn't was slow getting through, and anyway, regulate it so all the rows were getting an equal amount of water. But the most fun on the farm that I can remember is going swimming in the hottest part of the day in the irrigation canals, and the other thing was sleeping out under the stars. Without air conditioning, we slept outdoors as much as we possibly could. The weather was good. But sleeping on top of a haystack and looking at the stars at night. In the winter time, we would sleep in the attic, which wasn't anymore, because the house wasn't finished on the inside. It was just the raw lumber, the 2x4s, and we put a platform on the rafters, and we'd make a platform up there, and it was always warmer up there than it was down in the bedroom. When we first moved there, we slept on corn shuck mattresses, and then this mother raised chickens and saved the feathers from picking the chickens. Then she made ticks, feather bed ticks. When we'd make the bed, we'd take a broom and we would push the feathers all up, stir them up inside these feather ticks, and then we'd take the broom and because we were small, Mother would just take her hands and pat it out, but we'd take the broom and pound it. The more you pounded it, the softer the feathers, the fluffier the feathers would be. But my sister and I always slept together, and in the wintertime, we'd curl up. We even let each other put their cold feet on, whoever was, because, some of the times Doris's feet was colder than mine, and sometimes it was me, and we just curl up together for the warmth, to get warmed up. Because without, at night the house was cold except around the heater. So our fires always smelled good and they burned good, but hot. The stove sometimes it turned red, the heater. And Mother cooked in a big wood range, like your Majestic. Those old stoves were a lot of fun too, because if you wanted to cook fast, of course it made dishwashing bad, but you'd take the lid off of the stove and put the frying pan right over the hole, where the lid was, and then when you want something to cook for a long time, like a big pot of beans, if it was too hot over the first two lids, then you'd shove it to the back. You just pushed your cooking around on the stove for the heat you wanted. And the first one in the wintertime, the first one awake had to build a fire, and you jump out of bed and you learn to build a fire in a hurry, and then jump back in bed until the house warmed up a little. We used to play house by drawing our houses on in the backyard on the packed dirt, and we played with little cars. We had a few of those. We played the games like Run Sheep Run and Annie Over, and my brothers played that too. But they didn't play with us as much as Doris and I played together. In the evenings in the summertime, we would, most of our activities were outdoors because it was cooler. In the evenings we would popcorn and make fudge or divinity and play the organ, the guitar, we'd sing and see who could catch the most popcorn, throwing it up. And by the time we got through, we had quite a room full of popcorn on the floor. We always had a lot of good conversation and enjoyment from each other when we sat up to the table. And several times they said we ought to have a microphone and sell our sell our fun that we had at the table. That was before TV, of course. We took our own lunches, except when Mother had a nickel that she could give us, and we'd buy 2 cents worth of crackers and 3 cents worth of cheese. That was a treat. It was the Lincoln School, called the Lincoln School then.
And it was the same location where the
same location. It was a gray frame building, and it was built in the 1800s. It had I think it was the 1800s or very early 1900s, and it was a 2-room school, gray wood building, and there was a bell tower. They always rang the bell for us when recess was over, when school was beginning. And we would line up in front of the school and salute the flag. Then we'd go in to our rooms. The 5th through 8th was Mr. Gigax's class, and the 1st through the 4th was Mrs. Gigax's class. When we marched into school, the first thing we did was have the Lord's Prayer. And I don't remember, it seems to me like we sang My Country 'Tis of Thee, probably before we saluted the flag. And we had track. And my sister was a first. She was kind of hard to beat in running, the dashes. There was one girl that once in a while would beat me. She was a tall girl. Her name was Helen. Anyway, she was fast, but I usually won all of the dashes. Even though I was one of the smallest kids in the school, I was kind of fast. And the softball and volleyball. We even got to play basketball when the boys would let us. Sometimes we'd play together. And we did have meets. We would go to other schools and compete with them. And that was the only day that we were allowed to wear pants, the girls. We had to wear dresses to school. And we didn't have overshoes as a rule. I think the Lions gave us a pair of overshoes that buckled. They were boys' overshoes, and they a little big for me, and Doris wouldn't wear them because they were boys, but I wore them, and I'd get to school with my feet dry. But in the winter, when we had to walk through the snow, most of the kids were allowed to, before school started, would take their shoes off and lay their wet socks on the radiators to dry. Before I got out of school in Lincoln School, they had built onto it a brick addition, and we had a music teacher then. We had Latin. I took 2 years of Latin. My teachers were Mrs. Skinner, Mr. Beck, Mrs. Delaplane, Mrs. Laurent, and we traded eggs for yeast cakes and some of the ingredients that Mother might. Soap, laundry soap, when she run out of homemade soap. And it came in cakes of soap. She sure put out a beautiful wash with her square tub Maytag gasoline motor. And I remember when the engine wasn't working just right, she'd pump on that. There was a foot pedal that you pushed down, and that's the way you started it. Mother would do a lot of things to get food on the table and in the jars and so on and so forth, but this was when we lived in that little,
Newland's house.
yeah, Newland's house, and the screen itself was kind of rotten, and Mother would stand in the door and shoot a pheasant's head off. She was a good shot. And Mr. Newland had come out, and he'd look around, and she'd wait till he'd go back in the house, and then she'd go out to get some chips in her apron, and she'd pick up the pheasant and put it in her apron along with the chips. So that's the way we got our pheasant meat.
Yeah.
Then we had an actual cellar where there was, where Mom put she did a lot of canning. She just put away dozens and dozens of bottles
Yeah, hundreds.
of well, probably so, of just about anything she could can. Venison, chili, green
Chicken.
beans, chicken. Oh, yeah, we had chicken and cows. Well, Mom, hard worker. I can remember building the fire out in the front yard to heat the water for washing the laundry. Mom was a good cook. She'd make biscuits and gravy and steak, venison. We had venison quite a bit. But in the mornings we'd have hot cakes and eggs and hash browns. She was good with potatoes, and she'd make hash browns.
Before it got sour, the cream would raise up, and it had the thickest good cream on it. And in the mornings, what I really liked to do, instead of using butter, I liked to put that real thick cream on my pancakes and the syrup on them, and ooh, it was good.
Mom used to like to make root beer too, and she'd bottle it in those bottles, make it with yeast, and leave it for a few days, and it is
She
just
could keep
really,
us kids away from it.
it is just really good root beer, and I
Oh,
haven't had
yeah.
anything since that I enjoyed so much as that root beer.
And we did, once in a while, we had an old ice box later. At first we had just that cooler box, that it was a screen box with gunny sacks over it, and a big tray on top of a sheet metal tray with holes punched in it, and Daddy fixed a wheel with a chain on it that you could crank, and these cans would go clear down. This chain went clear down to the wash, the creek, and it would dip up water, and it would fill a big can that would drip slowly into this one that had holes in it, and it would keep, that water would drip onto the gunny sacks and burlap sacks,
Evaporative cooler.
and it kept the milk, for a day.
The flatbed, as I remember, wasn't very big, so we used the wagon and horses to get wood because we could haul so much more.
We
And,
hauled our water that way too.
You had to haul water.
Oh yeah, we had two big tanks. They were identical. They probably held 200, 500 gallon, I don't remember. And one was Daddy put one in the cellar and then built the cellar over it, the roof, so you couldn't have gotten it out. And then he had a chimney in the top of the cellar, and it was covered, of course, with dirt, the top was. And he would run a hose down through this chimney into the other tank. We would go with the horse and wagon with this one big tank on it. They were steel tanks, big iron tanks. And we'd go to the cemetery where there was a artesian well close to the cemetery.
Real good water.
Yeah,
That's
it was right on the
cemetery
bank.
that-
They're
Outdoor
climbers
orchard
by
base.
Climbers Dairy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
In the winter time, when the water was frozen in this place where the river backed up, we would take ice skates, and my ankles were so wobbly that the only way I could ice skate was when someone had given us a pair of shoe skates, and when those were laced up, then I could skate. Mostly on my seat, though, before that. And we took potatoes, and we'd build a bonfire and stick the potatoes. We'd put the potatoes on the ground and then build our fire over it. And we usually got hungry before the potatoes got done, and they were burned on the outside. The skins were, and a little undone on the inside of the potato, but they were good. They were hot, and we used to eat those baked potatoes. And if we were lucky, we had hot dogs.
About once a month or so, we'd go into town, and that was a big event because rarely, but I can remember a time or two, Dad would go down by the railroad tracks at the packing shed and buy bananas, a bunch of bananas. And for a day or two, we just ate lots of bananas.
So you-
Yeah, on the farm, I think when I became 8, they took me in and I was baptized, and that's probably the only time that we ever saw the church building. We never attended any meetings.
Daddy was too busy working on the farm or fishing on Sunday, or hunting.
Yeah, Ivan Walls, who was a neighbor of ours, used to call me the damned little Mormon, and that's the only reason I knew that we were Mormons. I'm not sure how much of the church or the gospel Dad really understood.
I don't think he understood a lot, but you know, I've seen him cry great big tears when he was at church and there was a moving talk. I think Daddy was spiritual. I mean, he felt it, but he liked his Sundays to do what he wanted to more.
Well, Dad was a real good man, and he was a hard worker. He was honest.
Very honest.
He never talked about people that did him dirt. He was not vindictive. Tom Skidmore and other fellows took real advantage of him, and my nature would be to soothe the socks off of the guy and get even with him or really bring him to task. And Dad never said a word.
Well, Dad was optimistic too. Very optimistic.
But I can never remember Dad really talking bad about anyone.
I don't either.
Mom was very patient, put up a lot with Dad. Dad cussed. As a cowboy and a miner, he learned cussing, and that was half of his language. Just about every other word sometimes was a cuss word.
Of course, Dad didn't know a stranger either.
He could have.
Maybe.
Well, we could have been.
Stranger is the friend you haven't met.
Yeah.
That's the way he was, yeah.
At this time, while I was going to Lincoln School, and I was in the 10th grade, I met your daddy. Actually, I met him in the summer. They were a little late getting their tomato crop planted, and Daddy, Charles and Frank and Doris and I went up to help them. I can remember wondering if he was a boy or a man, and when I finally decided that he was a grown man, I wondered what kind of a husband he'd make. Doris went to stay all night with Joy a few times, and she started dating Harlan. And then Merle came along to visit that summer, and he was more fun, so she started dating him, and they talked me into going to a movie with Merle and Harlan, and she and I, the four of us, rode in your dad's 35 V8 coupe. He had a V8 Ford coupe. After we went to the movie, I started dating your dad. That was in the fall, and our first date was, he invited me to go stop by. We didn't have a telephone, so he just dropped by and asked if I'd like to ride out to Fruita with a load of pinto beans that he had to haul down there. And that was our first date. And then we went to a movie after that. Then 9 months later, in June, we got married.